Hey, welcome back everybody. It's Gettysburg 159 and here's our third live video and maybe the 10th video we've already posted for Gettysburg 159. We're really happy to have you and we hope you'll share this with your friends. You're with the American Battlefield Trust and I'm Garry Adelman. We got Chris White behind the camera. We have a couple of guests coming on that you'll meet soon enough. And we're just going to continue our first day's coverage on the location where the actual battle took place. I know this seems obvious for a lot of y'all, but I mean, a lot of battlefields aren't preserved the way that Gettysburg is right now. And we'll talk about this land and how it was preserved a little bit later in the live feed. But for now, share it with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you give us a subscribe. We're trying to get to 200,000 during this particular anniversary. So, if you've watched our other videos or if you read about this battle, you know that on July 1st, 1863, the Confederates, the first Confederate force, came out that road. You're looking generally northwest over the Chambersburg Pike, okay? And at that time, here comes Heath's division, and Heath's division is going to do the bulk of the fighting against the famous Iron Brigade and some of those other units as well. Okay, eventually they'll push through them and other reinforcements come in. Here come the Bucktails. We've already talked about them on a video. And here's the key part. More Confederates are coming up, but the same Union soldiers, the Bucktails over here, the parts of the Iron Brigade over on the other side over there, are all going to come together for a last stand here, not on McPherson's Ridge, which you can see in the distance, but here on Seminary Ridge. In other words, the last fighting on the first day's battlefield, so to speak, really is going to take place in and around where we stand right now. Let me just visually do it right here. We can show you a big map of the first day's fighting, but what we're going to be focusing on right here is what's going on right around here. We're going to talk about some of the Iron Brigade, the 6th Wisconsin over here. We're going to talk about a less-known Confederate Brigade of North Carolina soldiers. That's 5 regiments under Alfred M. Scales, fighting against a whole line of cannons here, as well as some of these Pennsylvania Bucktails. So to talk about all this, let's bring on our good friend Tim Smith. You've seen him on a lot of the lives before, and I don't even know what Tim's going to talk about, so take it away.
The fight for Seminary Ridge in the late afternoon of July 1st has always been one of the parts of the battle I've found most interesting. And also, you know, most of the area where this fighting took place is not part of the Gettysburg National Military Park. For many, many, many years, it's been privately owned, either as part of the Lutheran Theological Seminary or the Lee's headquarters complex. And, you know, I always had talked to people about the preservation of the site, and most people were like, well, you know, Lee's headquarters, and they wanted to focus on whether Lee stayed at the house or he didn't as part of the preservation efforts. But I always thought that this area should be preserved because it was the scene of heavy fighting on the afternoon of July 1st. And I wanted to do a couple readings from people who are involved in this fight on both the northern and southern side and get a couple perspectives. But basically, the elements of the Union First Corps that made a final stand along this ridge, each one of the regiments had suffered heavily already in the fighting out in front of us. Most of the units had lost 50% or more of their men already. But when they rallied on this ridge, a line of artillery was placed along the infantry regiments. And right here in this area, we had Stewart's Battery B, 4th U.S. Artillery. We had a section of Reynolds Battery, 1st New York Light Artillery. And we had the 5th Maine Battery under Greenlee T. Stevens. So there was a bunch of artillery pieces mixed in with the infantry. Now, the elements of Heath's division have at this point had halted their advance, and Pender's division came on. And really, 3 brigades of Pender's division attacked this immediate area, along with Junius Daniel, who was obviously part of Rhodes' division. So these Confederate soldiers, more than 5,000 Confederate soldiers attacked this ridge. And they probably expected that these units were worn out and maybe could be driven off the ridge easily, but such was not the case with all this added artillery along the line. One of my favorite books about the first day, and I think one of the best regimental histories out there, is Service with the 6th by Rufus Dawes, the colonel of the 6th Wisconsin. And he very dramatically describes this moment in his book as Pender's division begins to advance. Along the Seminary Ridge, flat upon their bellies, lay mixed up together in one line of battle the Iron Brigade and Roystone's Bucktails. For a mile up and down the open fields in front, the splendid lines of the veterans of the Army of Northern Virginia swept down upon us. Their bearing was magnificent. They maintained their alignment with great precision. They came forward with a rush. The musketry burst from Seminary Ridge, every shot fired with care, and Stuart's men, with the regularity of a machine, worked their guns upon the enemy. The rebels came halfway down the opposite slope, wavered, began to fire, then scatter, and then to run. And how our men did yell, "Come on, Johnny, come on." It's interesting that Rufus Dawes, being a member of the 1st Army Corps, is part of a cadre of Union veterans that describe the first day's battle and highlight the fact that the Northern Army is holding its own. And when the Northern Army, when the time does come for the Union Army to retreat from this ridge and back through the town, it's not the fault of the troops here, of course. It's the fault of the German troops north of the town, of the 11th Army Corps. And it's interesting that regimental histories such as this promote this concept and this idea very well. So I thought I'd mention this here. Lieutenant Clayton E. Rogers, aide on General Wadsworth's staff, came riding rapidly to me. Leaning over from his horse, he said very quietly, "The orders, Colonel, are to retreat beyond the town. Hold your men together." I was astonished. The cheers of defiance along the line of the 1st Corps on Seminary Ridge had scarcely died away, but a glance over the field to our right and rear was sufficient. There, the troops of the 11th Corps appeared in full retreat, and long lines of Confederates were fluttering banners and shining steel were sweeping forward in pursuit. And again, this narrative ignores the fact that part of Pender's division under Abner Perrin has broken through the Union line at the seminary and is sweeping over Seminary Ridge on the other side of the Iron Brigade and Stone's Brigade. And that's the real reason that they have to retreat from this ridge, not because of some other troops on some other part of the battlefield. Now, Scales' Brigade is halted, and Scales' Brigade does not advance after this initial halt. The 13th North Carolina of Scales' Brigade is especially torn apart in this disastrous charge. According to the adjutant of the regiment, they had 180 men on the first day of the battle, and he says they lost 150 of them, leaving them with about 30 men that, of course, will participate in Pickett's charge the next day. And oddly enough, there's a really nice account of a man in the 13th North Carolina in John B. Gordon's reminiscence of the Civil War. It's in a chapter called War by Brave Against Brave. And John B. Gordon tells the story like this. At Big Falls, North Carolina, there lived in 1897 a one-armed soldier whose heroism will be cited by orators and poets as long as heroism is cherished by men. He was a color bearer of his regiment, the 13th North Carolina. In the charge during the first day's battle at Gettysburg, his right arm, with which he bore the colors, was shivered and almost torn from its socket. Without halting or hesitating, he seized the falling flag with his left hand, and with blood spurting from the severed arteries of his right arm, dangling in shreds at his side, he rushed to the front, shouting to his comrades, "Forward, forward." The name of that modest and gallant soldier is W.F. Fawcett. Now, I don't know when I first read that account, but it was not in Gordon's reminiscence. I read it in a general book on the battle. And I always was stunned by that, vivid description. I think it was about 1995. I was along with some other licensed battlefield guides, and we took a trip to the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in Washington, D.C. And at that archives, they have a collection of Civil War medical bones and stuff that were saved for so doctors could analyze the process of amputation and what it looked like. And they had a list of all the bones that they had in their collection, and they handed it to us while we were listening to their demonstration. And I noticed that they had the arm bone of William F. Fawcett of the 13th North Carolina. And I asked them if I could see it. And they got the bone out, the arm bone that was amputated, and I was able to hold his arm. And of course, I was stunned because it was his left arm and not his right arm. This account is wrong, and I've been living under that misconception all these years, and it really bothered me. But William F. Fawcett died in Alamance County, North Carolina in 1903. And you can find his grave on Find a Grave if you like.
That's great. I know you really well, Tim, and I don't think I remember that story about the bone. And man, when you connect with actual stuff, from the battle, let alone from somebody's person, that's pretty powerful stuff. It is. Okay, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're here at Gettysburg 159, and we are talking about the Battle of Gettysburg. Of course, you're seeing a mellow me because we're wearing lav mics here. Thanks to Chris for getting these. I think the sound is pretty good. I haven't seen a single complaint yet, but it's bound to come soon. I want to make sure I talk about several things. Before I break out what I'm holding here, let's talk about there's a new badge called Anniversary Follower. I didn't know that before, but congratulations to all y'all who are following this anniversary. I'm seeing some good hashtags, and that'll have to do with this shirt I'm holding, so let me just do it now. Gary's beard, Gary's hat, and hashtag Granny from Tennessee. Now, Granny from Tennessee might get on Sarah's good side and end up with one of these Ancestry Fold 3 cool Battle of Gettysburg map t-shirts. So we're going to give away about 10 of these during the anniversary, and I think the way to do it is through the comments, and then Sarah will go ahead and make the call. I also like seeing so many members around the battlefield, and on here today, we're seeing Joe and Connie talking about their membership a lot, so thank you so much for that. We have Virginia, Ohio, and Michigan competing to see who will have the most people on, and in the meantime, we got France and UK on at the same time. Thanks so much for joining us from there in Oklahoma and Michigan and elsewhere as well. Make sure you check these. These will be forever on Facebook and YouTube if anybody has a question about that. Hello, Tom Gilmartin. And finally, Linda said she could listen to us all day. Man, is not the case with our spouses at home. So I just wanted to say that real quick. Now, with no further ado, let me bring on another guest. You like this guest. You always talk about this guest because this guest rocks. So with no further ado, Dr. Carol Reardon, Gettysburg Foundation, Gettysburg College, and 70 other places.
Hi, everybody. If it's July the 1st, we know where all the cool kids are. We're right here at Gettysburg, and that's what we want to do. We want to continue to educate and inspire. There's many stories here to be told, and you have the bunch. We're going to tell you some of those. We've decided to talk about this last stand here on Seminary Ridge, and you've already heard a couple of really cool stories. I'm going to add to that. Right here where we're standing, we're not too far from Lee's headquarters, from the Thompson House, land that we helped as the trust to preserve. That's an awfully good thing, a feather in our cap for sure. And we want to talk a little bit about some of the fighting that went on right over there. One of the regiments that fought up here that we've already heard about was the 143rd Pennsylvania. We always talk about the bucktails or the bogus bucktails, but not all three of Colonel Roy Stone's regiments designated themselves as bucktails. The 149th and the 150th certainly did, but the 143rd and its 465 men did not consider themselves to be bucktails. They wore just plain kepis. They did not adorn them with the bucktail or anything of the sort. But we've sort of lumped them in, so we'll keep them in with the bucktail brigade. When Roy Stone's brigade fell back from its positions on McPherson's Ridge, the 149th and the 150th were mostly over here where we are filming on the south side of the Chambersburg Pike. But the 143rd's flag and most of its men were over on the other side of the road, the northern side of the road. And it's one of their soldiers I wanted to tell you about. Now, Tim set us up perfectly for this when he told us that, the retreat of the First Corps was often being blamed on the retreat of the 11th Corps and its German troops, how they ran, almost repeating their Chancellorsville debacle. Well, not all the Germans in the Army of the Potomac belonged to the 11th Corps by any stretch of the imagination. And you know I like to tell stories about individual soldiers, and the one I picked for today, without even knowing what Tim was going to talk about, happens to be a German-born soldier in the 143rd, Pennsylvania. His name is Ernst Knierim. He's living in Luzerne County when the 143rd is being recruited in the summer of 1862. When Lincoln had called for 300,000 more men, there were a lot of regiments being formed, and he hadn't gone off to war in that first blush of enthusiasm after Fort Sumter. He waited until the summer of 1862 to enlist. He's formally mustered in early September of 1862. He is in his late 20s. He's a married man. He had married his wife Christina. They were both from Germany, but they did not meet and marry until they were here in the United States. What's interesting is that in their records, what's interesting is that when you take a look at the records that we can find on Fold 3, one of our partners for today, we can find a copy of their marriage certificate. The church is in Dunmore, Pennsylvania, up in the Scranton-Wilkes-Barre area, but the language is totally in German. And the first time I saw it, I thought, they married in Germany before they came to the United States. But no, if you take a look at it, it's very clearly a German language marriage certificate produced here in the United States. So they've been married for about 5 years when the war came, and Ernst Knierim decided that he would serve his country. He enlisted as a private, but he showed himself to be a good enough soldier that in February of '63, he was promoted to corporal. Somewhere late in the fight, probably in the fight just over across the street from us here, he was going to take a bullet in the upper left chest. It really bothered his company commander a lot. His company commander, Captain Blair, was going to write about Knierim and said what an incredibly good soldier Corporal Knierim was. During the trying and severe marches to Chancellorsville, Virginia and Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, he was an uncomplaining soldier. And when the hosts of black-hearted traitors came upon the First Corps with numbers not a third of their own, he was one of the foremost in the deadly conflict. Well, that speaks very high praise. He fought during the battle as a noble patriot, periling his all for his new country in the capacity of a non-commissioned officer. Because he was hit in the upper chest and therefore was still mobile, probably friends and comrades helped to get him behind the lines when finally the First Corps line breaks and heads back towards Cemetery Hill. As a result, he was apparently taken to a house or some kind of a hospital in town, and since he was mobile, in other words, his legs weren't hit, he would be among the first to be removed from here in Gettysburg to another location. He was taken to York, Pennsylvania, and he was put into the hospital there, the military hospital in York. He fought very hard to survive his injury, but as it turned out, he just couldn't do it. On about October 3rd, somewhere between October 1st and 3rd, Corporal Ernst Knierim passed away. Apparently, he was a patient that had attracted the attention of the surgeons and other personnel at the hospital, because they took great care in recording everything about his last moments and what would be sent home to his family. We don't often have an opportunity to see what a soldier was carrying with him, what possessions he had at the time of his death, but they made very clear what all Ernst Knierim had with him that would be returned to Christina. He had carried with him one pipe, a tobacco pouch, one fine comb, 4 letters, 6 envelopes, 12 sheets of notepaper. Clearly he was a letter writer. Boy, do we wish we had those letters. He had a cap, a pair of pants, and blouse, and 60 cents. And all of this was attested to by one of the surgeons who took care of him. Ultimately, his records would have to be cleared back at the 143rd Pennsylvania's headquarters, and the lieutenant who checked through all of his records discovered that Christina Knierim was owed $92.30 in pay because the corporal had not been paid since the 28th of February. He fought for 4 months without any pay whatsoever. He was owed $12 in unused clothing allowance and $50 unpaid bounty. He could have just listed the monies owed and signed off on it and been done with it. But the lieutenant added a final comment. "We very much regret the death of so good a man and brave and patriotic soldier. I am constrained to say that he possessed the qualities of a good man and a good soldier." And he underlined man and soldier. And he wanted to make sure that Knierim's family back in Luzerne would know something more about the loss. Christina would start the application for a widow's pension. The widow's pension are essentially survivor's benefits that the federal government had approved beginning in July of 1862. There were a lot of hoops to jump through, but somebody thought that it would be important to help Christina get that money. What was at stake was a monthly payout of $8 a month. Somebody clearly helped her because whenever she signed the paperwork, she signed it with an X, only an X. She could not sign her own name. She was approved for a pension and she began to get it. And she received it on a monthly basis until her death in the early 1880s. There's kind of a tragic ending to all that, even beyond everything that we've already talked about. When she passed away, two fairly unscrupulous individuals back in Luzerne County decided not to report her death and continued to collect her pay and absconded with it on a monthly basis until 1885 when the deception was uncovered. The two men were arrested and they were put in jail with a bail of $1,500. $1,500 in 1880s money is some serious cash, and ultimately they were found guilty and put in jail. There was a great deal of generosity in the widow's pension system, but there was also a great deal of accountability involved, and those who tried to take away Christina Knierim's money after her death were called to account for that. One thing about the stories that I love here at Gettysburg is that they rarely end here. It's like throwing a pebble into a pond, and the ripples just keep going and going and going. So a story that begins probably over in this field right across the way, and then went to a hospital in York, keeps going until we get involved with the American justice system, the American legal system, 20 years later. It's the kind of story that makes a soldier's story a broader American story, and one to which all of us can relate. Now, Tim was telling us an awful lot about Scales's brigade. And Scales's brigade, I mean, you just take a look behind us here and you can see the fields over which they were advancing. If you take a look across the field, about halfway on the other side of the rail fence that you can see, the Virginia rail fence, just beyond it you can see a strip of green, bright green. It's a brown field, but there's a strip of green. That's the low ground. There was a stream that went through there. That's why we have the greenery there today. And an awful lot of Scales's men talked about as they crossed that field, they made it as far as the low ground. And wherever you have that little stream going through, it sort of eroded the ground. It sort of created a small mini trench, and an awful lot of them pretty much stayed right there. It was near there that General Scales said he got wounded and was taken out of action. And in Scales's regiments, every one of the colonels and senior commanders got hit one way or another. That's why this brigade, when it goes into Pickett's charge 2 days from now, it won't be under Scales, it won't be under the senior colonel. They're down to the next level down, to a lieutenant colonel who will lead it into the great charge. It always kind of bothered me, I guess, that when we're here on the first day's battlefield, we start out with Buford, and Buford has a great story. We talk about the Iron Brigade, and the Iron Brigade has a great story. We go up to Oak Hill, and there's all kinds of great stories up in that area. And then once we start driving down in this area, we're mostly making the transition to July 2nd. And since this is not usually part of the battlefield, we are on ground that for the longest time was part of the seminary. Mostly we didn't stop here and get out and take a look at the perspective of the Northern forces on that last, during that last great charge of the Confederates when Pender's division with Scales heading right toward us right now. We just didn't take the time to look at it. For years, I dismissed the losses that Scales's brigade and Perrin's South Carolinians took, until I started digging down deep and realized that their casualty list was absolutely incredibly long. And this was their big part of the battle. So clearly this is a part of the battlefield. When you come here, stop and visit. A lot of you are going to want to go to the Seminary Ridge Museum. There's a parking lot right there. There's a walking trail right here. Come out here and take a look at it. This is something that by and large we haven't paid nearly enough attention to. Now, one of the soldiers from Scales' brigade that's coming across this field is a young lieutenant by the name of John Ford. And John Ford is a tough character. He's a young man in his 20s. He enlisted May 9th, 1861. He started out as a color sergeant. He was wounded in action at Fredericksburg. He's promoted to second lieutenant in 1862. And he's going to be involved in this attack. He won't be able to tell us his story, but his company commander does. His company commander is George Henry Mills of the 16th, Company G of the 16th North Carolina. And basically look right over my shoulder and imagine what's happening in this attack. We moved off at a quick step across a meadow, and some began to receive the attention of the foe. And many of our men being struck with Minnie balls and shells, the men began to fall around me in my own company. Second Lieutenant John Ford fell on my right, John H. Bradley on the left, just after I helped him pull the ramrod which had gotten fastened from his gun. Numbers of others were wounded. Our surgeon was shot in the head, and ought to have been killed for being there and not for attending to his duty. I did all I could do to get him to dismount and attend to John Ford, for I saw he would bleed to death unless attention was given him. But the surgeon rode on, the only mounted man I saw on the line. That surgeon's name was E.T. Fry, and later on out in the field he would be wounded. But apparently his performance here left a lot to be desired, and he's going to be dropped from the rolls in November of 1863. But that's not going to help Lieutenant Ford. One of the problems with this ground, and again, look over my shoulder and take a look at it, notice how the ground dips down and rises back up again. It wasn't anybody in Scales's brigade, but a colonel in Perrin's South Carolinians who would say this was an incredibly awkward spot to be in, because once you fell, there was no safe exit from this field. If you were going to be pulled back to the safety of a hospital area, to the rear area, you would have to go up that high ground, exposing you even more, even for the full distance, to Union artillery fire. It's within rifle shot. You could be hit by a burst of musketry. There was no easy out here. All you could do was lay on the lowest ground possible and hope that all the gunfire went over you. And that colonel from South Carolina said that this was the only time during the war that he ran into a situation where the terrain just worked so badly against the wounded trying to escape. Not only were the wounded trying to escape, but the stretcher bearers, perhaps the drummers, the musicians, those who would be charged with coming in to get the wounded, were not going to come over the rise and expose themselves to danger, making it even harder on those lightly wounded Confederates who are trying to escape and go back up over the hill. Captain George Mills is going to continue the story of the death of Lieutenant John Ford. I found Ford lying face down, and raising him up, I saw at once that he was dying. I asked him if I could do anything for him. He could not speak, but motioned with his hand to be carried off the field. I called a couple of litter bearers that I saw in the woods nearby to come and take him to a safer place, but I could not prevail upon them to do so, and the poor man died where he lay in just a few minutes. And sometimes that's just the awful part of some of these stories. Help is within sight, but the situation, the circumstances here, the unusual terrain features made it absolutely impossible for his remains to be retrieved, to get him back to safety. Colonel Brown, the South Carolinian who made the observation here, talked about this fight because the two brigades, especially Scales and Perrin that fought here, suffered heavily. And when he reflected upon it in years to come, one of the things he wrote that just is awfully powerful, very brief but very powerful, he said, "To stop was destruction, to retreat was disaster, to go forward was orders." That tells you an awful lot about what motivated these troops. It's stories like these that help to explain why many Southerners had a hard time coming back to Gettysburg. Even though there were a number of reunions here, many Southerners could not afford to come, and other Southerners simply decided that they did not want to come. This was the site of a defeat, a Confederate defeat. It was also the site of heavy casualties. The Charleston newspaper in 1913, while the 50th anniversary of the battle is going on up here, attended by thousands and thousands of veterans from both sides, the Charleston newspaper said, "The Battle of Gettysburg in itself was an abominable thing, not a thing to celebrate. At Gettysburg, thousands died in utmost agony. At Gettysburg, good and gentle women were widowed, and the happiness of homes was destroyed. We are not celebrating the battle, but the valor of the men who faced without flinching, a thing that was infernal." Come to Gettysburg. Help us in the cause to try to preserve the story and preserve the memory of the men who fought here. This is a part of the history we all must embrace. Some of us do it from our classrooms. All of us can do something to help further the story. Gary, come on in.
Thank you, Carol.
You're itching to talk to people.
Yeah, it's true, but I want to embarrass you for a sec. When you first came on, let me just see. Love me some Carol, Doc Carol. Somebody talked about Canada. Thanks, Robert, and thanks for your generosity. Dr. Carol's fantastic. Love Carol's stories. Dr. Carol back. Carol, Dr. Reardon's terrific. Great stories. Carol, the coolest of the cool kids, and it goes on and on. But
thank you.
thanks, Carol. Someone has actually topped all of this. That is Letty, who is waiting to deliver her twins while watching this feed. So man, that is the comment of the day. Now, we have some questions to answer, and then I have another thing or two to say, which surprises nobody. Let's bring on Sarah K. Bierle, see what those questions are.
Well, hello. I have been going through the questions and comments on the live Facebook feed, so thank you so much for bringing those in. And Gary, this is going to be a quick answer for you, but what's the name of the barn behind us?
That is the McPherson barn, because there is no fear in McPherson.
There we go. All right, another question that we had, and I think this is a great one to help do a little clarification in a term. What is a bucktail?
Good questions. And by the way, let me say, this is the Sarah who's going to decide who wins the t-shirts and the Ancestry membership. So keep your questions and your comments coming. So the bucktails are an interesting group, and literally they were good shots, and to prove that, they wanted to wear a deer tail, a buck tail, on their actual kepis. So you'll see reenactors often wearing those on there. Now there's the bucktails and there's the bogus bucktails. I went to high school and college entirely in the 80s, so I don't take calling something bogus lightly. And I'm gonna leave it to y'all to figure out which group of bucktails are which. Is it Stone's brigade are the real ones or the bogus, or is McCandless's brigade, at least here at Gettysburg, the real or the bogus? I'll leave that to you and totally cop out.
All right, our last question that I've pulled from the feed, do keep them coming as we continue going live. I'm looking at them. As we have time, we'll come on and answer what we can. But our last question, about what time did fighting end on July 1st, 1863?
Ooh, so, you know, that's tough, because what counts as fighting? Is it marching? Is it artillery? Is it desultory skirmishing and things like that? So really, and there's no standardized time. So you have that problem as well. What I'm going to say is that by the late afternoon, by 4:30, the Union Army is already streaming back through town. And, you know, we're relying on the unreliable timepieces of the soldiers who set their clock based on where they thought the sun was. Of course, we did have a courthouse in town, but how are they setting that one as well? So that's going to happen latest afternoon. But in the same sense, you know, you have Confederates trying to move on Culp's Hill, and there's a little bit of capture going on. Does capture count as fighting or whatnot? I'm going to say, and we've got some real first day experts behind the camera right there, but I'm going to say that it's basically down to a little skirmish and desultory cannon fire by 6:30. I'm going to turn my back here so that I can't see their faces because I said that. We good?
Well, I'm seeing smiles behind the camera and a couple shrugs, so we're going to go with that answer for now. Oh, Chris is not approving. All right, well, maybe we'll revisit it later because we've got a lot more left in the first day.
Good, good. And I can see it's painful for them just watching me have the first day floor here, which is not usually my bag. I want to say one last thing. And Chris, maybe you could pull the camera from the tripod here while we talk about it, because maybe one of the reasons, like Carol was addressing, that people don't talk about Scales' attack and the actual fighting going on over near Lee's headquarters is because it's not preserved. There was no trail until recently. You couldn't even legally access it till recently. So you, the members of the American Battlefield Trust, have helped us to preserve everything in the distance here. Okay, including the land we stand on right here. And this is National Park Service land there, going all the way up the next ridge and to those woods and beyond those woods over to the country club that you also helped us save as well. There is a seminary trail over there that the trust now owns the land on, and we have an easement on the other side of Seminary Ridge as well. Now come over here, because you really didn't even have great access here, that is, unless you parked at the motel that used to be here. And I wish y'all could have been here and seeing at least 25 people walking our trail during this particular live, okay? This is the trail that used to just be at the side of the motel, the putt-putt, and the swimming pool there. And there now, you, the members of the organization and our supporters, have helped us to restore that to its wartime appearance, and we have an interpretive trail there now, and they can connect across the street and see all sorts of good things. So let me just say, we appreciate you watching. We're glad you support battlefield preservation. If you're ever able to get involved actually as a member, please do. Go to battlefields.org, and we make it easy for you to click that join or give button. Do it if you can. You can also donate through Facebook and other means as well. If you can't do that, continue to follow us, share our stuff, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks to Chris, Sarah, Carol, and Tim, and thank you all for watching and for supporting battlefield preservation and education.